Y'all, we live in difficult times. There's war, political unrest, the pandemic, poverty, families being torn, communities ripped by gun violence and people dying every day. Police, injustice, it's all bringing so much pain. But y'all, we can look inside our minds and we can understand who we are, become better, and do this thing like we've never done it before. But it all starts with our mental health, and I know we can do it. I believe in you because I believe in me, and I believe in us. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Therapy is Life, where thinking, feeling, and experiencing well-being is what we do. I woke up this morning with my mind made up. I was stayed on my path and journey. And what about you? Hey, do y'all know what it's like to pick cotton? What does it feel like? Any of y'all got any ideas of what it's like to pick cotton?
Painful, I would think, because what I was told, I think, isn't there like thorns in it? Mm-hmm. Like you can actually like injure your hands. Like they have like, you don't have like these protected gloves to utilize to do it, but there's thorns that might get in your hands while you do it.
Right.
That's what I was told.
Yeah, labor intensive. You know what I mean? Labor intensive for like not the greatest output. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Lots of labor just to get a good output. You know?
Yeah. I talked to my dad about it. He said, when he was a kid, because my grandfather, believe it or not, it wasn't that long ago.
It wasn't, man.
My grandfather was relevant during the 1930s. That's right?
Crazy.
Think about it, right?
Deep.
Think about it. He was a sharecropper.
Okay.
My dad grew up riding the horses, man.
Okay.
I ain't never touched that life.
No.
I only did horses to be entertained.
Right.
But my dad actually rode horses, man.
Sure. Imagine. That's crazy.
This was in South Carolina?
This was in South Carolina and North Carolina. Most of it was in North Carolina. My grandfather lived out in this area called East Spencer, near Salisbury, North Carolina. Shout out. And then, but my grandfather, big dude, man, like JB, big dude, man. Like probably like 6'4", dark skin. Some of his friends I've had a chance to talk to him because he died when I was very young. Mm-hmm. They say, man, my grandfather was a real quiet, laid back dude, but he was you didn't mess with him.
Right. About that life.
It's the quiet one, man.
You ain't mess with
him. Better stay away.
But he was a sharecropper, man. But in the 1930s, man, my grandfather had to be pretty young then, but they could go out and they could from sun up to almost sundown be outside trying to pick cotton. And if you didn't have any gloves, because my dad said it didn't really hurt him, but my grandmother, because my grandma would go out there with my grandfather on the weekends and they would pick cotton, and my dad and his cousin Johnny, they would go, and they were young, so they would be out there picking it. And he said, about the thorns. But for them, it didn't hurt that much because they were small, so they could get it without hurting their hands, touching it, the thorns. But my grandmother, my granddad, they would have to have gloves on.
That's crazy.
One of the good things about being out there, you get your sun, you get your sunshine in, right?
Vitamin D.
You get your vitamin D, and you would get your squats in.
Right. I mean, that body work.
You get that body work in. Yeah. So, they didn't have some of the problems we have now because they do a lot of squatting. Right. That's supposed to be one of the magic exercises.
Right. But I was thinking they probably didn't have like quality water to, keep them hydrated.
Yeah.
So, the levels of dehydration and stuff like that to be able to work in there for countless hours still was intense.
Hey, they knew that they understood the magic of the watermelon though. Like, and people be talking about watermelon now, how it's one of those foods you should eat every day. Yeah. Our ancestors understood that a long time ago.
Yeah. I mean, but you had to, right? Because you had to be your own resource, right? Like how do we make this work, right? How do we survive this, right? because this is what we're doing. So how are we surviving in it, right? So they had to know those secrets. Like, they had to pass that down.
That's why we were some of the greatest inventors, because we came up with ways to be able to circumvent the situation.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Be able to survive through it. So that's for sure.
Gotta be.
I'm gonna use the word lazy right here, and the reason why I say lazy, because I want people to understand that lazy is not necessarily a bad thing. Because sometimes when you understand you don't want to you want to be more efficient, you come up with an easier way to do it, so you won't have to work as hard.
Yeah.
Work smarter, not harder.
Right.
That is a term that old barbers gave me a long time ago. We'll find a way to work smarter, not harder.
Yeah. And you know what, man, cotton was king at one point, y'all. They doing in America, in the Americas. This is America.
Jukebox. There you go. That's my cut.
Cotton, rice, tobacco. Tobacco was first for a long time. Then it became cotton. And by the 1800s, the middle 1800s, before slavery ended, cotton became king. In fact, that was a quote unquote a political ideology that cotton was king, and it influenced a lot of things. And it was so much a significant part of the America's gross domestic product. That it not only dominated the economy of the South, but it also dominated the economy of the North. America was rising up on the backs of slaves.
Right.
Absolutely.
And then during the Reconstruction period, when blacks got, freedom, they became sharecroppers. And you think about it, we get to, from 1863, we get to 1832. That's when centers takes place, and black people still living in these small houses, huts. They're probably making somewhere about 60 cents a day in the fields, and still inadequate housing. And by the way, because the transatlantic slave trade ended in the early 1800s, that meant there was a stop of course, slaves being transported into America. So they started building these small houses that they could live in because they wanted to take care of their slaves better, because they realized that, and so procreation and taking care of them. So it became more important to take care of, to make sure they ate right, because they wanted this low cost labor
Solution, man.
But it was a great part of the building of America. This is America. But anyway, so could you imagine what it felt like to somebody in the 1930s? Because now we're talking about, from the time of slavery, you still got these people out here in the fields picking cotton every day.
And when you say like how small the generations were removed from that, even being present day, that you can recall a grandfather who was a sharecropper. So just think about their experience and their thought of literally probably remembering their fathers and grandfathers being actual slaves and didn't have the opportunity to, grow an opportunity of freedom. And so I would think, mentally, they probably, from our perspective, we would look at it that they may been feeling depressed or still oppressed in that type of time frame, but they probably really were more ambitious and optimistic than you would think.
Right.
Because when you look at people like Stacks and Smoke, who were now taking matters in their own hand and saying that I won't just be this person who does labor and I'm going to go and put my own destiny in my own hand, and I'm going to look optimistically into being an entrepreneur now and building something. in this space, even if it's a limited opportunity, even if it's not as equal as my oppressors at this time. I'm gonna build this thing brick by brick.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's a thing that Black people in those times were optimistic in looking at their future.
So motivation. So you're saying some of their motivations for leaving home was they was exhausted with what was going on in Mississippi, Jim Crow, picking cotton, not making no money.
Right.
They saw outside of that, so that drove them to leave. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, they definitely had to have vision. Cause they like, where are you going that you've never been before, right? All I know is I don't want to do this.
This no more, right?
I'm not doing this. You know what I mean? And we're talking about entrepreneur. That wasn't, that wasn't a word back then. It's just like, I'm not picking cotton. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm about to go figure it out and go do something else and make a way. I think like, if you think about like the motivation of it too, like I know that I see how the world is working where there's a need, and if I can provide the need, then I'm a resource, right? And I think that they became resources, right? And some of the work that they talked about, they did, right? No, I see a need there, so if I can meet that need, that's a way out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You know, with Smoke and Stack, right? I think one of the things I see with them is this desire and drive. We talk about to get out and do something with themselves. And in the belief that, hey, we go to Chicago, there's no Jim Crow there.
Yeah.
We go to Chicago, we're going to have opportunity. If we go to the war, because I think they also fought in the war.
Right.
And they did that. And I think a lot of Black people in that time that had that hope was also thinking that if I could just go somewhere and prove myself, I would be accepted.
Right.
If I could just go and do something, people would see me. And, it made me think about right now, because a lot of things I'm hearing and everything, a lot of things I'm feeling, a lot of things I'm seeing right now. And when I'm waking up and realizing where we at, it's like, despite the fact we've done all these things in invention and creation and design and cultivating our environment, our worthiness is still being questioned as if it was something that was just handed to us, that we didn't work twice as hard, 3 times as hard, 4 times as hard. So in the 1930s, when Stack and Smoke come back home, they've gone to Chicago. They've gone to war. Yeah. I get the sense they've even went with Al Capone and worked, right? But they still find themselves. Because remember in the car when they got Sammy, one of the first questions Sammy asked them, so how was Chicago? What was it like? And he's excited about it. Yeah. And they like, man, look.
They got into some gangster life out there.
Right.
They got into some gangster
life. some real street
utilized.
But people don't talk. We talk about the Great Migration and Black people moving from the Delta, moving from the South to the North. But what we don't talk about is why some Black people actually came back. Because maybe what they realized when they got to the North, it was, well, how did they say it? Going back to something you said earlier. Look, I got to Chicago. There was a devil there too. I came back to the devil I knew.
It was more familiar.
It was more familiar, and so we might as well come here and try, because there, look, I'm not familiar with it, and it didn't work. It didn't work for me. So we don't oftentimes talk about Black people coming back to the South. But they was those individuals who came back. That wasn't no fairy tale. People actually did it because they went to the North and realized it wasn't what they thought it was.
Yeah. Well, and I think, though, that there was a great migration to places like the North, even West. Like, people moved to California, for these opportunities that didn't remind them of what slavery was, the oppression of laborers, cotton labor, and being out there in the sun and the chain gang style. But I think, because these were different atmospheres for them, and there were new devils that they had to experience in these places, coming back to that place of familiarity, gave them a little bit, and they were probably a little bit faster paced with their thinking now. from being in these cities. You know, it's like, okay, it moves at a different speed. Let me go where it's a little slower,
right?
And bring what that big city life taught me, and bring that back to the South.
Yeah. And what if, which goes into the next question about what are some of the reasons why they came back a little bit more. What if I can go back? I got a little money now. I can start a juke joint. I can make some money. I can be in a place where I'm familiar. I can be in a place where people know me and respect me. Because on some level, even with Sammy, I feel like they were seen as heroes.
Oh yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, they were definitely like everybody feared them. They had reverence, right? Where they
there you go.
Right, they had reverence. It was like, oh shoot, I didn't know that was you. You know what I mean? Now that I know to change my thinking. But that didn't mean like when they traveled that was the same level of thought, because they going somewhere new. They're not established there. But back at home, in my comfort place, I know what I can run and I know how I can run it.
Right.
So it makes sense for me to go back now that I got money, right? Because before I didn't have the resource. Now I got this resource. Now the money can bring something in where I can make something work. And then this is how it's going to flow, because I got all the people set up in place. Right. They knew exactly where they were going. It wasn't like, oh, who do you need to go see? There was a plan of action in place. You go here, I'm going to go here. You get this, I'm going to secure this. Right? Yep. They worked the plan.
Yeah, they worked the plan. And you know what? I think they were more respected than feared.
Oh, yeah.
More respected than feared?
Yeah.
I think sometimes fear equates to respect from that mindset. I know I was raised in that like old school like that, like, all right, yeah, you getting disciplined, you know what I mean? So there was a healthy amount of fear that you had for that parent that came along with, hey, I might get a consequence I don't want, you know what I mean? So I think it tied into each other, right? Where, fear and respect held hands. And it was just like, you're someone to respect because I also fear you. I know what you're capable of.
I also think that level of respect came from their experience from travel. And like we were talking about last episode about the importance of travel, you gain a new perspective. You gain a new experience. You have more culture that you're bringing back to the table now. From their vocabulary, the words that they were using, the style of clothes that they were wearing. It was not of what the South had at that time, so they were bringing a whole fresh new light to the area.
Yeah. They was informed in the ways that other people, had not seen. I remember going to doing the Bayou Classic. Y'all familiar with the Bayou Classic? They have it in New Orleans, HBCU, Grambling, and Southern. Sure. Well, I went down there one year with a close friend of mine, and Terrence, shout out, and he said, look, when you get to my town, man, look, everybody don't come by to see you. I was like, man, you playing, man. Like, yeah. So I get to the town, there's only one traffic light. Had Thanksgiving with him. Mom's food was, oh my God, so good, man. That was the first time I'd had some really, truly fresh Louisiana cuisine, man. Those people, they live to eat, right? And it was so good. And I'm sitting there after that meeting, just chilling. And next thing you know, all these people in their garage. And this girl started to say, yeah, we all came here to meet you. I'm like, oh, for real?
Wow. And what was it? The fact that you were... What was the fact that everybody was drawn to you?
It was just because I was new. I was new, and I brought something different to the table. And those guys came back. They brought something different to the table, and they also had what we might call street cred. Like they already established themselves, and people looked up to them. And then they came with all this stuff, and they had money, which a lot of black people didn't have at that time.
Yeah.
That being a big point. The fact that they had some money. It's like, let me see what type of game they can give me so I can get my money up.
Remember when Smoke with the little girl? And when she saw him, she was like kind of standoffish. She was like, no, come on, I'm going to give you an opportunity to make some money.
Right.
And it was like he was trying to teach her about money and negotiating.
Give her life game.
Yeah, he did. He did give her a gem, actually.
Yeah.
He gave her some negotiation tactics real quick.
Yeah. So that was it. And so this whole idea of the juke joint, man. They wanted to start it. How did it make you feel? What did you think about it, guys?
The fact that they were
where it was, the location,
well, yeah,
everything.
the location of it being an exporter of where they killed black people was deep within itself, right? The fact that this was the place now that they wanted to establish their business, and this was the same place that pretty much was the grounds of death for their people, was symbolic within itself. But I think, the fact that they wanted to start a juke joint was their visionary thinking into that this is something that this town doesn't have. I've come from Chicago where I see juke joints thrive all over.
Right.
Let me bring this back to this dry land, and I know it's going to be a idea that's going to be successful.
Exactly.
And one day they got the town buzzing on it.
Exactly. One day, man. That's powerful. One day, man. One day. They ain't had no internet.
No.
Word of mouth.
Word of mouth, man.
All it took.
Word of mouth.
That was all it took.
Now, granted, the community was small, so it made it easier, man.
Word spreads fast.
Yeah, it made it easier, but jeez, man. When you think about that place, Clarksdale, Mississippi, you think about it, it was fascinating to me to learn they didn't have a movie theater there. They actually go and see the movie. And so they had to cultivate this idea at the city community center to build a theater in there. And Ryan Coogler went down and they had some panels and it was like a 3-day thing.
Oh, wow.
But
I didn't know that.
this was a place, the foundation place of the beginning of the blues. Anyway, the Delta blues anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when we think about Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters.
Yeah.
Smokestack lightning. But anyway, I ain't no blues singer, but
you are at heart, buddy.
You got it. You got it. It's in there.
Hey, but check this out. When I was a kid, man, I used to could sing, man. My sister can sing, my daddy can sing. I used to could sing, and somewhere around the teenage years, I lost that high part. I couldn't hit all them high notes like I did when I was a kid. But when I was a kid, I could hit all.
Only in the shower. When you in the shower, you probably hit them notes.
I believe it.
Like somewhere I lost that, boy. But listen, but you know what? When I think about Smoking Stack, man, I see young men that had experienced a lot of trauma, and throughout this movie, they talk about their trauma, and so I want to ask you, nicely, because you're a clinician here, and look, can you give us a little bit of a definition about what trauma is?
Think of trauma is like an experience that you have that impacts you. It leaves its imprint on you, right, in one way or another. So you're feeling it, right? So when you talk about traumatic events that happen, right, that car accident that changed you and now you don't want to go in the car anymore. You know what I'm saying? That abuse that you experienced, right? That assault that you had, right? All of those are like traumatic experiences. And one of the things about trauma is that a lot of people don't realize is that your body is built to keep you alive, right? So when you experience trauma, it almost leaves like a fingerprint on you, right? There's like this book that talks about like the body remembers, and your body literally remembers, and it braces you for things that bring you similar types of feelings that are related, right? So it could be a sight or a smell or something that's triggering that experience that you first felt in that fear, right? That your body like flooded you with adrenaline and it flooded you with emotion, right? So anytime you're going through trauma, it stays in your body. And, you know, in consideration of that era, it's kind of crazy the ability to survive it because it was constant.
So we could call it complex trauma.
Yes.
Complex
trauma. Yeah. Right? So it's crazy, right?
It's crazy. It's crazy. And we might refer to what they experience as racial trauma.
Yes, absolutely.
Which these incidents keep going on because of who you are, your racial identity or ethnic identity. And then you got the historical and intergenerational trauma. My granddaddy experienced a certain thing. My daddy experienced a certain thing. I experienced a certain thing. And so it's passed down in our DNA.
Passed down
Generation. So we thinking and feeling and responding certain ways because what happened to our grandfather. Like, I used to think older people didn't like banks. But I understood what happened to black people in the 1800s.
Isn't that crazy?
And all their money got lost and everything. And Frederick Douglass was like one of the I guess the ambassadors and one of the people that was put over this process to help black people save money and put their money in banks. But then you ever read the book, The Color of Money, it talks about this whole process. So when you hear people being traumatized, saying, no, I don't trust banks, man, look.
That's why.
That's why. Or even our feeling about police. Whoop, whoop. It's the sound of the...
Listen.
Fear.
Because of past trauma. And when we talk in generalization and we say white people, now I know that all white people, there's a lot of good white people in the world.
Of course.
But there's white supremacy. But a lot of times when we talk about it, we just say white people. We know not all white people are bad or mean to harm us. But there are ones in certain positions. But it takes some processing of your experiences to be able to articulate it in that way.
Correct.
Shucks.
Yeah.
No, that's true.
And I think one of the things that we forget too is like we need the opposite of the experience to believe that that's possible.
Exactly.
Right.
Right.
And that's why like a lot of people like when you're looking at the world and you know there's certain protections that being a race and they're like, well, you don't really need them anymore or whatever. Well, the protection would have been put in place if it didn't exist, right? There was a necessity for it, right? So like you re-experiencing these things and it's like the release of protection because we haven't felt the opposite.
Right. Yeah, exactly. We haven't felt the opposite. So we had these things in place. You know, I oftentimes remember the fact that it wasn't until like 1964, 1965 that African Americans had full rights as citizens in America.
It reminded me of like a client telling me one time about his experience over in the military, and his camp was bombed, and he saw literally one of his soldiers get bombed. And when he came back to America, it took him years to be able to experience fireworks because fireworks just reminded him of the feeling of seeing one of his partners getting bombed. Yeah. And so it took years for him to come down from that. So like you said, through the experiences of police brutality and just oppression and things that racism has done in America to black people, that familiar place when it presents itself, it's hard to overcome that. It's hard to get past that until we get a time period of experiencing something opposite. You know, to be able to heal from that in a proper way.
And one of the challenges with that is when you have opportunity that's really the opposite, because you're so conditioned to see things from the place of adversity, it's hard for you to see it as being a place of equality because, you know, you're looking for something to hit the fan.
Right.
Yeah.
You're looking for it to hit the fan. Yeah. And so when you think about Smoke and Stack, man, they had dealt with racial trauma. When you think about it, they had dealt with historical trauma. And then when you think about it, they probably saw some community violence. I wouldn't say, but they went to war, right? Yeah. They saw that. But then you hear them tell their story, and what you hear, so Stack says, when he's talking to Sammy, he says, well, they talking about their dad, their father. And so Stack, he said, well, so did y'all kill? Sammy asked him, did y'all kill your father? And he said, and Stack says, no, Dad knocked me out. And then he said, Smoke
killed him.
Smoke killed him. That's what he said. He said, Smoke killed him.
Yeah.
Okay. Smoke killed him. And so having to deal with that, we talk about child adverse experience study, when you deal with that kind of stuff. Right. So by the time they got into their 30s, they had had so much bad experiences. So when they walk into that barn, that joint that day, knowing everything they know is a part of their story. But notice how they come. They come with the money, but they also come with their guns.
Yeah, they do.
Definitely.
And they wasn't for sure, but they knew, like, tell your clan friends to stay off this land and don't come on our property because of what they had experienced.
Yeah.
So what they were, and people might look at them and say, well, they were the quote unquote angry black men. But what we had to understand was it was the environment which had created it. I think Pac had tried to manifest that many times in his music. Look, it wasn't that I wanted to be this way.
Right.
But this is what society has shaped me to be.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's we are a sum of our experiences.
Absolutely.
You know, and so with all the trauma that Stack and Smoke presented through their life at that time point, I think it manifested into how their demeanor were. You know, they were very bold and very, you know, just what's the word I want to use? They were just very stern, and both showed it in different ways on their demeanor. But I think their past trauma, it you know, created that for them.
Yeah.
And y'all remember Tupac and the idea of thug life?
Yeah.
The hate you give little infants F's everybody.
Powerful.
So when you think about Smoke and Stack and that acronym, it speaks to it.
Yeah.
So, you know, as we didn't land on Plymouth Rock landed on us. So we was in a position, we were put in a place where this anger and this frustration that they experienced was being manifested. Now that we're aware of it, though, we have to do better because it will eat us up. It will destroy us, and we will be easily placed into the criminal mechanism that actually takes away our ability to stand up for ourselves in the long run.
Yeah, that cycle.
But anyway, y'all, we're going to have to continue this discussion in the next episode. Don't forget to leave all your comments, all your questions, all your concerns, like us, and don't forget to subscribe.